Little girl gets slapped by her new stepfather for showing up at his wedding. She says 2 words and shocking everyone. Before we begin this story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We would love to hear from you as we embark on this emotional journey together. Now let's dive into a story that will stir your heart and touch your soul. The sun was just beginning to set over the small town of Willow Creek, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. Sarah Hamilton stood before the mirror in her modest bedroom, adjusting the lace of her wedding dress. The soft rustling of the fabric filled the quiet room, a sound that seemed to echo the hope swelling in her chest. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. She was marrying Lucas Gray, the man who, until recently, had seemed to be everything she'd ever dreamed of. Her son, Noah, stood by the door, nervously shifting from one foot to the other. The little boy was only 9, but he could already sense the tension that seemed to cling to the air. He stared up at his mother, a question hidden deep in his eyes. "Mom, are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah turned and smiled softly at her son, kneeling to his level. "Of course, sweetheart. This is the start of a new chapter for our family. You'll see everything's going to be perfect." But as she brushed a stray lock of hair behind his ear, a small gnawing doubt settled in her stomach. Lucas had been kind to Noah, yes, but there was something about the way he spoke to the boy, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. It wasn't the warmth she had expected from a father figure. It was something colder, more distant, but she pushed the thought aside. Today was supposed to be the day of joy, of hope for a better future. Noah, still not convinced, tugged at her sleeve. What if he doesn't like me anymore?" Sarah's heart clenched, but she forced a smile. "Lucas loves you, Noah. You're his family now too." As she stood up, brushing the wrinkles from her dress, she glanced at the clock. There was no time to waste. The ceremony was about to begin. She reached out and squeezed Noah's hand, trying to assure him that everything would be okay. But deep down, she wasn't so sure anymore. The walk to the church felt like a dream in slow motion. The air was cool and crisp, a perfect spring day, and yet, it felt as if the weight of the world rested on Sarah's shoulders. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The streets were lined with familiar faces, all greeting her with warm smiles, congratulating her on the new chapter of her life. But it was Lucas's smile that seemed a little too tight, his grip on her hand a little too firm. Inside the church, the guests were already seated, their whispers like soft murmurs in the background as Sarah walked down the aisle. Her heart raced as she looked ahead at Lucas, who stood waiting for her at the altar. He was tall, handsome, with dark, piercing eyes that could be both warm and unsettling. His suit fit him perfectly, the image of a man who had everything: wealth, status, charm. But was that enough to make him a good husband? A good father? When she reached the altar, Lucas leaned in to kiss her cheek, his breath warm against her skin. She smiled, but the smile felt forced. The feeling in her gut grew stronger, more insistent, as if some silent alarm was going off, warning her to pay attention. And then the ceremony began. As the priest spoke the vows, Sarah found herself nodding along, her voice barely audible as she repeated the words she was supposed to say. For better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. She could feel Noah's eyes on her from the front row, and for a moment, she wondered if he could sense the same unease that she felt. But she pushed the thought away. There would be no turning back now. She was committed to this new family, to this new future. And yet, as she said her vows, the words "I do" felt more like a question than a promise. As the ceremony drew to a close, Lucas kissed her, a kiss that was meant to seal the deal, to mark the beginning of a perfect life together. But the moment the kiss ended, the applause filled the room. Sarah's heart dropped. The moment she had waited for, the moment she had dreamed of, didn't feel as perfect as she had imagined. The moment she stepped back from the altar, Noah's small voice rang in her ears, soft but clear. "Mom, I don't like him." Her chest tightened. and she turned to look at Noah, whose eyes were wide with fear and confusion. He didn't say anything more, but his expression was enough to send a cold shiver through her spine. Was it possible that Noah was right? Had she made a mistake? As Sarah's hand trembled in Lucas's grasp, she could no longer ignore the growing sense of unease. What had she gotten herself into? And as the applause continued to echo in her ears, Sarah couldn't help but feel a deep, sinking fear settle in her heart. The reception was in full swing, a grand affair held at the Willow Creek Country Club, where laughter, clinking glasses, and soft melodies filled the air. But for Sarah, it all felt distant, like she was watching someone else's life unfold before her. The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest, suffocating her, and she kept glancing toward Noah, who was sitting by himself at a table, his eyes cast downward. Lucas was by her side, ever the charming groom, his smile never faltering as he entertained their guests. He moved from person to person with ease, his presence commanding, his voice smooth and confident. Sarah tried to smile in return, but it felt forced, like she was playing a role in a play she didn't know the script to. Her thoughts kept drifting back to that brief moment before the ceremony, when Noah had spoken so plainly, "Mom, I don't like him." What did he mean by that? Was it just nerves, a child's natural fear of change, or was there something more? Noah had always been a sensitive child, but she had never seen him so uneasy. "Everything okay?" Lucas asked, his voice cutting through her thoughts. He was standing beside her now, his hand lightly resting on her waist. "Yes, of course," Sarah replied quickly, forcing a smile. But there was a distant look in her eyes that Lucas didn't miss. He studied her for a moment, his gaze lingering longer than usual, before flashing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good, because I've got something planned for us tonight, just the two of us." He leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "You're mine now, Sarah. Remember that." The words sent a shiver down her spine, but she tried to push the unease away. Maybe she was just overthinking things, maybe she was just nervous. It had been a whirlwind romance after all, and she had never imagined that something as simple as marrying Lucas Gray would be so complicated. She looked back at Noah, who was still sitting alone, his small hands twisting around the napkin in his lap. He looked so out of place, as though the world around him was foreign. Sarah's heart ached for him. She should be comforting him, reassuring him that everything would be all right. But here she was, stuck in a moment of uncertainty, not sure where to turn. "Why don't you go spend some time with Noah?" Lucas suggested, as if reading her mind. His tone was kind, but there was something about it that didn't sit well with Sarah. "Let him enjoy himself. It's his night too, after all." "Yeah, you're right," Sarah replied, her voice a little shaky. She excused herself and made her way toward Noah's table, leaving Lucas behind with the guests. Noah didn't look up when she approached, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. She sat down beside him, placing a hand on his. "Hey, buddy, you all right?" Noah looked at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and sadness. "I don't want to stay here, Mom. I don't like it. I don't like him." Her heart skipped a beat. "Noah, why don't you like him? Is he being mean to you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm, though her mind was already racing. "No." Noah hesitated, his small voice barely above a whisper. "But when he looks at me, it's like he's not happy I'm here. Like I'm not his son." He shook his head as if trying to make sense of his own feelings. "I don't want him to be my dad. Mom, I just want it to be us again." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. She had hoped, prayed even, that Noah would come to accept Lucas, that he would embrace this new life. But now, hearing her son's words, she realized how deeply he felt the absence of his father. Lucas could never replace Noah's real father, no matter how hard she tried to make it work. "I'm sorry, baby," Sarah whispered, pulling Noah into a hug. She could feel his small body tremble, his heart pounding in his chest, just as hers was. "I never meant for you to feel this way. We'll figure it out, I promise." As they sat there, holding each other, Sarah's mind was racing. Was this her fault? Had she moved too fast with Lucas? Could she have done something differently to protect Noah from feeling so alienated? Her thoughts were interrupted when Lucas appeared at the table, a smile plastered across his face, but there was a coldness in his eyes. "Noah," he said, his voice suddenly sharp, "why don't you go find some other kids to play with? There's a whole room full of them." Noah flinched and Sarah immediately stood, putting herself between Lucas and her son. "Lucas, that's enough," she said, her voice firm but trembling with emotion. "He's just a kid, for God's sake." Lucas's eyes narrowed, but he kept his tone calm. "I'm just trying to help him fit in. He's got to learn how to behave around other people." His words were laced with something Sarah couldn't quite identify, a hint of authority that didn't feel like love. "Not like that," Sarah snapped. "Not like you're telling him he doesn't belong. He's your son too now, Lucas. You need to treat him with respect." Lucas took a step back, his expression unreadable. "I'll remember that," he said, his voice low and measured. The air between them thickened, and for a moment Sarah wasn't sure whether this was just a disagreement or the first sign of something much darker. The tension that had been building ever since she met Lucas seemed to be escalating, and it left her with a terrible sense of foreboding. Noah had already gotten up, making his way toward the children's room in the back of the hall. Sarah watched him go, her heart heavy with doubt. Could she really go on with this marriage if it meant putting Noah in a situation where he felt unwanted? She thought back to her vows earlier that day, for better, for worse. But suddenly the weight of those words felt too heavy to bear. Lucas stepped closer again, his hand brushing against hers. "You've got to trust me, Sarah. I know what I'm doing. We're going to be a family." But as Sarah looked into his eyes, she wasn't sure if she could trust him, or if the dream of a perfect family was slowly unraveling before her very eyes. The evening wore on, but for Sarah, time seemed to drag, each minute heavier than the last. She tried to immerse herself in the celebration, laughing at jokes, accepting congratulations, and keeping up the appearance of a happy bride. But every time she glanced at Lucas, something unsettled her deep inside. His presence, once so charming, now felt like a weight she couldn't escape. After Noah had retreated into the children's room, Sarah had tried to shake off the lingering tension between her and Lucas. But it wasn't working. She found herself staring into her glass of champagne, as though the bubbles could offer some answer, some relief from the swirling unease. It was as though she was pretending to live in a fairy tale while everything around her was starting to crack. She excused herself from the crowd, claiming a need to check on Noah, though she knew deep down she wasn't entirely certain of her intentions. She needed a moment to think, to breathe. She made her way down a quiet hall, footsteps echoing in the empty space. As she approached the children's room, she caught sight of Noah sitting on the floor with a group of kids. His face was illuminated by the soft glow of a cartoon playing on the television, but his eyes were distant. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't interacting. He looked lonely, as though he were a stranger in his own skin. She crouched down next to him, her heart aching with the weight of his silence. "Hey, buddy," she said softly, brushing his hair from his forehead. "Are you okay?" Noah's gaze lifted slowly, but he didn't answer. Instead, he just gave her a small nod, which she knew wasn't enough. "You don't have to pretend for me, you know," Sarah added, her voice gentle but firm. "If you're not feeling good about all this, we can leave." Noah looked at her, his eyes welling with unspoken emotions. "It's not that, Mom," he said in a low voice, barely above a whisper. "I just don't like him. Not like that. And he said things." "What things, Noah?" Sarah's voice caught in her throat. He hesitated, his fingers nervously twisting the hem of his shirt. "He said that I should stay out of the way, that I'm not part of his world." Sarah's chest tightened, the words striking her like a blow. No matter how much she wanted to believe that Lucas was a good man, that he'd make a loving stepfather to Noah, the reality of what her son was saying was clear. Lucas wasn't just cold toward Noah, he was actively pushing him away. She took a deep breath, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I promise we'll get through this, okay? Just hang in there for a little while longer. I love you." Noah didn't say anything more, but he nodded and gave her a small, sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sarah kissed his forehead and stood up, determined to have a conversation with Lucas about what was happening. This time, there would be no ignoring the cracks in their relationship. She couldn't keep sweeping things under the rug for the sake of appearances. Not when her son was suffering, but when she returned to the main hall, she found herself face to face with Lucas once again. His eyes locked onto hers, with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. He was standing near the bar, sipping from a glass of whiskey, but his posture was rigid, controlled. He was waiting for her as if he knew exactly when she'd return. "Sarah," he said, his tone smooth but edged with something she couldn't quite place. "I've been looking for you. There's something I want to talk about." Her stomach tightened. "What is it, Lucas?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He set his glass down on the counter and took a step toward her. His smile was still there, but it no longer looked reassuring. It was almost predatory. "I know Noah's having a hard time adjusting, but we both know he's a smart kid. He'll get over it. And if he doesn't, well, I'm sure you'll help him. Right?" The way he said it, so nonchalant as though Noah's feelings were something that could be easily dismissed, made Sarah's skin crawl. She forced herself to meet his gaze, though every fiber of her being screamed to look away. "I don't want him to just get over it, Lucas," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I want you to treat him like a son, like he matters." Lucas paused, a flash of irritation crossing his face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that same calculating smile. "I am treating him like a son, Sarah. He's just not making it easy for me is all, but I'm patient. I'll wait." The chill in his voice sent a wave of dread through Sarah. What did he mean by that? "I'll wait." She tried to force the unease from her chest, but it lingered, gnawing at her, especially as Lucas turned to mingle with the other guests once more. She watched him go, a heavy knot forming in her stomach. There was something dark in him, something that had been there all along, lurking beneath the surface. As the night wore on, Sarah found herself questioning everything. She knew that Lucas was controlling. He had shown flashes of it early on in their relationship. But this was different. The way he dismissed Noah, the way he acted as if her son's feelings didn't matter, those were warning signs she couldn't ignore. She excused herself from the festivities once more, this time finding a quiet corner to collect her thoughts. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, trying to sort through the whirlwind of emotions that were threatening to overtake her. "Sarah?" The voice that called her name brought her out of her reverie. It was Claire, one of Sarah's oldest friends who had been by her side through thick and thin. Claire's face was full of concern, her brows furrowed in worry as she approached. "You okay?" Claire asked, her voice gentle but probing. Sarah forced a smile, but it felt too thin, too fragile. "Yeah. Just trying to catch my breath. It's been a long day." Claire didn't buy it. She stepped closer, her expression softening. "Listen, I've been watching you and Lucas all night. Something's off. Are you sure this is the right choice? I mean, you've been with Noah all this time, and now it feels like he's getting lost in all this." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Did Claire see it too? Was it that obvious? "I don't know, Claire," Sarah admitted quietly, her voice breaking. "I don't know if this is the right choice anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain, like the storm that had been brewing in Sarah's heart for months. But now, finally, it was out in the open. And once it was spoken aloud, there was no turning back. The air around Sarah felt thicker as the evening wore on, like an invisible weight pressing down on her chest. Her mind kept replaying the same words over and over, the ones that Lucas had spoken to her earlier. "I'll wait." She couldn't shake the sense of unease. The gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. The sharp edge in his voice, the way he dismissed Noah's pain so casually. It was all too much to ignore. And yet, here she was, standing in the middle of her wedding reception, pretending everything was fine, pretending she was still the happy bride. But beneath the layers of champagne toasts and celebratory music, her world was quietly unraveling. Claire stayed by her side, her concern now palpable. It was as if her presence grounded Sarah, as if she were the only person left who could remind Sarah that she wasn't alone in this. The reality, however, was starting to sink in. The woman Sarah had been all these years, the woman who had found happiness in the arms of a man she thought she could trust, was no longer certain who she was. Not with Lucas by her side, and certainly not with Noah silently suffering in the wings. "Let's go for a walk." "Sarah," Claire said, a softness in her voice that made Sarah's throat tighten. "I know you're trying to keep it together, but you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to pretend." A lump formed in Sarah's throat as she nodded. She was thankful for Claire's quiet insistence, and the two of them slipped away from the crowd. Walking down the garden path just outside the venue, the cool night air seemed to ease some of the tension in Sarah's chest, though it did nothing to quell the storm raging inside her. They walked in silence for a few moments, their footsteps crunching against the gravel, before Claire spoke again. "I don't mean to push you, but I have to ask, Sarah. Have you seen the way Lucas has been with Noah? I've known you long enough to see the signs of something off. I can't just sit back and watch this." Sarah stopped walking, suddenly overwhelmed by the flood of emotions. She turned to face Claire, her voice trembling. I don't know what to do anymore, Claire. I feel like I'm losing him. He doesn't want to be around Lucas. But what am I supposed to do? I love him, Claire. I want this to work." Claire reached for Sarah's hand, squeezing it gently, her eyes full of compassion. "I know you love him, Sarah, but love doesn't mean turning a blind eye. It's not just about what you want. It's about protecting your son. And right now, I'm worried about what's happening behind closed doors." The words hit Sarah like a brick. Behind closed doors. It had been so easy to rationalize Lucas's behavior before, to dismiss the small things that bothered her, the little comments he made when Noah acted out, the way he expected Sarah to choose between him and her son. But now, standing here in the quiet night with Claire's unwavering gaze on her, Sarah realized that it wasn't just small things. It was the beginning of something much worse. Claire's voice softened, almost a whisper. "Have you ever thought, maybe he's not the man you thought he was? Maybe it's time to stop making excuses for him, Sarah. For Noah's sake, if nothing else." Sarah closed her eyes, the words sinking deep into her heart. Could it really be true? Could the man she had married, the man she had hoped would be a father to Noah, be the very source of the pain and fear she had seen in her son's eyes? As much as Sarah wanted to deny it, she couldn't escape the truth that was now staring her in the face. The fracture had already begun. The warning signs were there, and no amount of wishing could make them go away. She opened her eyes, the weight of the decision pressing on her shoulders. "What do I do?" "Claire," she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. "What do I do if I have to choose between my husband and my son?" Claire took a deep breath, her expression unwavering. "You choose Noah, every time." For a moment, Sarah was paralyzed by the thought. It wasn't just a choice between two people. It was a choice that would alter the course of her life forever. If she confronted Lucas, if she stood up for Noah, everything she had built with him would crumble. But could she live with herself if she didn't? Could she live knowing her son was suffering in silence, trapped in a home with a man who didn't care for him? Before Sarah could answer, they heard the sound of footsteps approaching. It was Lucas. He stood at the edge of the garden, his silhouette cast in the soft glow of the lights from the reception. His gaze was fixed on Sarah, and there was something in his eyes, something cold, something controlling, that made Sarah's blood run cold. "You've been gone for a while," Lucas said, his voice even, but with an edge of irritation. "Everything okay?" Sarah could feel the tension building in the pit of her stomach. She stood there for a long moment, unsure whether to speak or just walk away. But before she could find the words, Claire spoke for her. "Sarah's fine, Lucas. She just needed some air," Claire said. Her tone casual, but with a hint of firmness. "Maybe you should go back inside. The guests are starting to wonder where you went." For a moment, there was a long silence. Lucas's eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of something darker in his expression. His lips curled into a thin smile. "Of course," he said, though his voice didn't sound entirely convincing. "Enjoy the evening, Sarah. I'll be inside." As Lucas turned and walked back toward the reception, Sarah felt a chill wash over her. Claire was right. Something was very wrong. Lucas wasn't just a man who couldn't love her son. He was a man who could never see Noah as part of his world. And that was the breaking point. The air in the garden had grown colder after Lucas's departure, but Sarah's mind was a furnace of heat, churning with confusion, anger, and a creeping dread that seemed to gnaw at her soul. She stood still, her feet planted firmly on the ground, but she could feel everything unraveling. Everything she thought she knew about her life, her marriage, her family, was slipping through her fingers like sand. Claire had given her the space to think, but Sarah knew there was no more time for thinking. The truth was undeniable now. Lucas was a stranger to her. A man whose love and respect for Noah were as thin as a veil. It hurt, more than she could ever admit, but it was a pain she couldn't avoid anymore. Her eyes remained fixed on the darkened path leading back to the reception, her thoughts heavy with 1,000 possibilities. What now? She had made vows. She had stood before her friends and family, promising to honor and cherish Lucas, to love him through thick and thin. Wasn't that what marriage was? A promise to weather the storms together? But now, standing in the cold night, Sarah realized that the storm wasn't just some external force they had to endure. It was inside their home, inside her marriage, in the way Lucas treated Noah, in the subtle but unmistakable power he wielded. "Sarah?" Claire's voice cut through the darkness, breaking her thoughts. "You're still with me, right?" Sarah turned to face her friend, blinking as if coming out of a trance. Claire's eyes were full of concern, but there was something else there too. A sense of urgency, the kind of urgency that made Sarah realize her friend had been waiting for her to make a decision. "I don't know what to do," Sarah admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "I thought I knew him. I thought I could fix this. That things would get better. But now I don't even recognize him. I feel like I'm living with a stranger." Claire took a step closer, her expression softening. "I'm here for you. You know that, right? Whatever you decide, I'm with you." But that was the problem. Sarah didn't know what to decide. Back in the warmth of the reception hall, Sarah could see Lucas talking to a few guests near the punch bowl. He was the picture of calm, the picture of charm. But to Sarah, everything he did now felt like a performance. She wasn't sure if it was his smirk, the way he had brushed off her concerns, or the glint of something darker in his eyes. But nothing about him felt real anymore. She had to face it. She wasn't just scared for Noah's safety. She was scared for herself. She had let herself fall into a false sense of security. She had buried her doubts beneath the surface, pretending everything was fine for the sake of the family she dreamed of. But that family was crumbling before her eyes and she couldn't turn away. "I need to go inside," Sarah finally said, swallowing hard. "But I'm not sure I can face him right now." Claire nodded knowingly. "You don't have to do it alone. I'll be there with you." Together, they walked back to the venue, the sound of their footsteps drowned by the murmur of guests inside. Sarah's pulse quickened as she neared the door. The weight of what she knew, what she felt, was unbearable. Yet the only way forward was through it. As they entered the ballroom, the music swelled, and the lights cast soft glows over the happy faces of the wedding guests. But it all seemed distant to Sarah, like she was watching it all through a fogged window. Lucas caught sight of her almost immediately, his smile wide, too wide. "There you are," he said, his tone light and almost too casual. "I was beginning to think you'd left me alone with my guests." Sarah forced herself to smile. The polite smile of a woman playing a role. "I just needed some air," she said, her voice steady even as her heart beat faster. His eyes seemed to linger a little too long on her, as if he was trying to read her, assess her. She felt his gaze like a weight pressing on her chest, making it harder to breathe. "Of course," Lucas replied, but there was something about his voice that made Sarah's stomach churn. "It's been a long day. You should relax. Let's enjoy the night, okay?" His words were sweet, but there was an undercurrent of something she couldn't quite name. It was the same undercurrent she had felt earlier, when he ignored Noah's hurt, when he subtly belittled her role as a mother. But she had to stay calm. She had to keep up appearances for now. "I'm just going to check on Noah," Sarah said, her voice firm, though her body trembled beneath the surface. Before Lucas could protest, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there. Strange look on his face. As Sarah moved through the crowd, she tried to find Noah. The boy had been quiet all evening, which wasn't like him. Usually he was full of energy, running around with the other kids, stealing bites of cake and playing games. But tonight he was nowhere to be seen. Her heart skipped a beat. "Where is he?" She finally spotted Noah sitting alone by a small window at the far end of the room. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on the dance floor, but his expression was distant, as if he was in another world. Sarah's heart broke as she approached him. "Noah?" she said gently, her voice laced with worry. The boy's head jerked up, and for a moment he just stared at her, as though he hadn't even realized she was there. His eyes were wide, filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. Fear, sadness. "Mom," he whispered, and it sounded like the word was torn from him. "I don't want to stay here anymore." "Why?" "Sweetie." Sarah knelt beside him, her heart in her throat. "What's wrong?" Noah swallowed hard, his small hands clutching the fabric of his shirt like a lifeline. "Lucas. He's scary, Mom. He doesn't like me. He never did." A chill ran down Sarah's spine, her breath catching in her chest. How long had he known? How long had he been suffering in silence? Her instincts kicked in, and without another word, she scooped him up into her arms, holding him tight. "We're leaving, Noah. Right now. You're not going to stay here another minute." Noah clung to her, his small arms wrapped tightly around her neck, as if he had been waiting for her to take this step, to finally make a move. As Sarah turned to leave the reception, she looked back once more at Lucas. His eyes met hers across the room, a flicker of something dark in his gaze, and for the first time Sarah didn't feel fear. She felt something else, strength. She was done pretending. She was done ignoring the truth. The moment she crossed the threshold of the ballroom, she knew this was the point of no return. Whatever came next, she was ready. And no matter what, she would protect her son. The crisp night air felt like a cold slap against Sarah's flushed cheeks as she stepped outside the reception hall. She held Noah tightly in her arms, her heart racing with a mix of fear, anger, and an overpowering sense of urgency. The moonlight was bright, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. But for Sarah, the world had turned dark, filled with the terrifying weight of a decision she had no choice but to make. Noah's face, pale and tear-streaked, was buried in the crook of her neck, his tiny body shaking with fear. She could feel his heart pounding, his soft sobs breaking through the tense silence that had settled between them. "Shh. It's okay, sweetie," she whispered, her voice trembling, trying to comfort him even as her own emotions threatened to spill over. "We're leaving. No more, Noah. You don't have to be scared anymore." She could feel the boy's small hands clutching her tighter, and it tore her apart. How could she have been so blind to the hurt her son had been enduring all this time? How could she have stayed with someone who made her child feel this way? As she walked briskly towards the parking lot, Sarah's mind raced. What now? Where could they go? Her thoughts flickered to the house she had shared with Lucas, but the thought of returning there, of facing him, made her stomach turn. She couldn't go back. Not after what Noah had just said. There was no fixing this anymore. Noah had made it clear. Lucas had crossed a line. There was no coming back from this. Her thoughts were interrupted when Claire appeared beside her, out of breath from chasing after her. "Sarah, wait!" Claire called out, her voice filled with concern. "Are you okay? What's going on? Why are you leaving?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. Her focus was on Noah, who had stopped crying for a moment, but the tremors in his body hadn't ceased. She gently stroked his back, trying to keep her own emotions in check. "It's over, Claire," Sarah whispered, her voice broken. "It's all over. I can't stay with him anymore. He's hurting Noah. He's been hurting him all along." Claire's eyes widened, the realization hitting her like a punch to the gut. "Oh, Sarah, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I never imagined." "Neither did I," Sarah interrupted, her voice shaking with emotion. "I thought I could make it work. But how could I ignore it, Claire? How could I let it go on? Noah is terrified of him. And I can't live like this anymore." Claire reached out, her hand gently landing on Sarah's shoulder. "You don't have to. You don't have to go through this alone." "I know," Sarah said, looking down at her son. "I know now. I don't know what to do next." Claire glanced over her shoulder toward the entrance of the venue, her gaze hardening. "I think we both know what needs to happen next, but you're not doing it alone, Sarah. Not anymore. We'll figure it out. I'm here. We'll go wherever you need." With Claire's support, Sarah finally took a steadying breath. She could feel the strength of her friend beside her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah realized she didn't have to carry this burden alone. She had a choice. And as much as the path ahead seemed uncertain, she knew what she had to do. By the time they arrived at Sarah's apartment, the weight of everything she had just experienced was still heavy in her chest. Noah had fallen asleep in her arms during the ride, his small, innocent face finally peaceful. Sarah couldn't help but feel a surge of love and protectiveness. "This is what matters," she thought, gazing down at her son. "Noah matters. I will do whatever it takes to keep him safe." Claire was the first to break the silence as they walked inside. "Do you want me to stay tonight? Just so you're not alone?" Sarah nodded, grateful for her friend's offer. I don't know what to do, Claire. I don't know where to go from here. Should I call a lawyer? Should I talk to my family? I'm scared." Claire wrapped her arm around Sarah's shoulders and pulled her into a warm embrace. "You'll figure it out, Sarah. You're stronger than you think. And we're in this together. No matter what happens next, you've got support. You've got me. And I'll help you make the right choices for you and Noah." For the first time in hours, Sarah allowed herself to feel a small sense of relief. She wasn't alone, not anymore. But even as she closed her eyes, letting the exhaustion take over, one thing was clear in her mind. Lucas was not going to get away with this. He wouldn't control her life, her son's life, or their future anymore. Tomorrow they would face whatever came next, together. The morning light sliced through the blinds, casting thin strips of sunlight across the small apartment. The soft murmur of traffic outside did nothing to soothe the storm brewing in Sarah's mind. She sat on the edge of the couch, the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her chest like an iron cage. Noah was still asleep in the bedroom, a peaceful expression on his face, blissfully unaware of the upheaval that had consumed their lives. For him, it was just another day. But for Sarah, everything had changed. Her fingers brushed against the phone in her hand. She had been staring at it for the better part of an hour, unsure of what to do next. Should she call her parents, her lawyer? What about the police? The last thing she wanted was for this situation to escalate any further, but the truth was undeniable. Lucas had crossed a line, one that she couldn't ignore anymore, and as much as she feared what might come next, she couldn't let him continue. The silence of the apartment seemed to close in around her as her thoughts swirled. She needed to make a plan. She jumped as Claire's voice broke through the stillness. "Sarah, I know this is hard," Claire said, her voice soft but firm. She had been awake for a while now, quietly preparing breakfast in the kitchen. "But you can't keep running from it. You need to take action." Sarah glanced over at her friend, who was standing in the doorway with a steaming mug of coffee. Claire had always been there for her, but today, the weight of her support felt different, more intense. As if this moment had been building up for years, not just days. "I know," Sarah whispered, feeling the truth of it settle like a heavy stone in her stomach. "But what if I'm wrong? What if I'm just overreacting?" Claire stepped forward, placing the mug gently in Sarah's hands. "You're not wrong. You've been gaslighting yourself for too long, thinking you could fix this. But you've seen it, Sarah. You've seen how he treats Noah. This isn't something you can just let slide." Sarah's eyes welled up with unshed tears as she clutched the mug. Her chest tightened, and for a brief moment she let herself break. "I tried so hard to make this work." The words repeated in her head, a mantra of guilt and self-doubt. But even through the haze of her emotions, a spark of clarity burned through. She couldn't live in denial anymore, no matter how much she loved Lucas, or how much she had tried to convince herself that things would get better. He had shown his true colors. And that person wasn't someone she could live with. Not for herself, not for Noah. "I don't know what to do, Claire," Sarah said, her voice fragile. "I'm scared. What if this ruins everything? What if I lose everything I've worked for?" "You already lost it," Claire replied, her tone steady and calm. "What you had before was a lie. What's real now is that you're a mother. You're a woman who's strong enough to protect her child, no matter the cost." Claire's words settled deep in Sarah's soul, resonating like a truth she had been too afraid to face. Before she could respond, Noah shuffled into the room. Rubbing his eyes with his fists, Sarah's heart clenched at the sight of him, his innocence, his vulnerability, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a life free from the fear and the pain that Lucas had brought into their world. "Mama," Noah mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's heart fluttered in her chest as she reached out to him, pulling him onto her lap. "Hey, sweetheart, how are you feeling?" Noah buried his face in her chest, nodding but not speaking. It was clear that he wasn't ready to talk about last night, not yet. Sarah didn't push him, letting him take the lead. She had learned long ago that Noah needed time to process things in his own way, in his own time. But as she held him, something inside of her hardened, a resolve that had been missing for so long. She would fight for him. She would fight for their future. Claire cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "We need to make some calls. The sooner you get legal help, the better. And if you want to go to your parents, I'll be with you every step of the way. You don't have to make these decisions alone." "I know," Sarah said, her voice steady now, a quiet determination seeping into her words. She looked down at Noah, her arms tightening around him. "I'll figure it out. I'll do whatever it takes." The rest of the morning was spent in a flurry of action. Sarah called her lawyer, setting up a meeting for the following afternoon. She contacted her parents, though she wasn't sure what their reaction would be. Her relationship with them had always been strained, and they had never been entirely supportive of her marriage to Lucas. But this was bigger than her pride or her fears of judgment. This was about her son. With Claire's help, Sarah began organizing her thoughts, making lists of everything she needed to do. The reality of the situation began to take shape. But as much as she tried to focus, her mind kept returning to one thought. What would Lucas do when he found out? She didn't want to think about it, but she had to. He wouldn't just walk away quietly. And that terrified her. No matter how many steps she took to protect herself and Noah, Lucas wouldn't let her go without a fight. He had never been one to give up control easily, and Sarah had no illusions about what that meant. She would have to be prepared for whatever came next. As the day wore on, Sarah knew there was no turning back. The storm had already started, and she could feel the pressure building. She just hoped, prayed, that when it broke, she and Noah would be strong enough to weather it. The night stretched long and silent as Sarah sat in the dim glow of the living room. The house, once filled with laughter and the soft hum of a family trying to make things work, now felt hollow. The silence was overwhelming, suffocating. Noah had fallen asleep early, the exhaustion from the day settling into his small body. He was safe for now, tucked away in his room, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was gathering on the horizon, one that she wasn't sure she was ready for. She had spent hours preparing herself for the inevitable confrontation, yet a gnawing uncertainty lingered. Lucas hadn't called. He hadn't tried to reach out, and that in itself was unsettling. He always had to control the situation. Always. So why wasn't he reaching out? Why wasn't he demanding an explanation? Sarah's mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. What is he planning? The phone in her hand buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was a text from Claire. "Are you okay? Do you need me to come over?" Sarah's fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before she typed back, her words tight with emotion. "I'm scared, Claire. I don't know what to do." The reply came almost immediately. "I understand, but you're not alone. I'm here for you, Sarah. Remember that." Sarah swallowed hard. She had never felt more alone than she did right now. And yet she knew Claire's words were true. At least someone was with her. She wasn't entirely alone in this fight. Her thoughts were interrupted when the front door creaked open. The familiar sound sent a wave of cold dread through her. Lucas was home. She held her breath, listening to the slow, deliberate steps coming closer, each one echoing through the empty house. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, her body frozen in place as the door to the living room opened. Lucas stood in the doorway, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. His eyes, once full of affection, now seemed distant, cold even. For a moment, neither of them said a word. The tension between them was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. "Sarah," Lucas finally spoke, his voice low but controlled. "We need to talk." She stood slowly, her legs shaking under the weight of the moment. There was something in his tone, something off. It wasn't the same man she had married. It wasn't the man who had once promised to protect and cherish her. This was someone different, someone more dangerous. "I don't think there's much to talk about." "Lucas," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady despite the fear twisting inside her. "I've made up my mind." He didn't flinch, didn't show any sign of anger. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can just walk away from me? From this family? You don't even know what you're doing." Sarah's pulse quickened. But she didn't back down. She knew he was trying to manipulate her, to turn the situation around and make her feel guilty. But she was no longer that woman, the one who let him control every aspect of her life. She was a mother now, and her priority was Noah. "I'm doing what I have to do to protect Noah," she said, her words coming out sharper now. "And if you can't see that, then you're the one who doesn't know what you're doing." Lucas's face twitched, a flash of something dark crossing his features. He stepped closer still, until he was only inches away from her. His breath smelled faintly of alcohol, his hands clenched into fists by his sides. "You're making a mistake, Sarah," he said, his voice barely a whisper now, but heavy with threat. "You have no idea what you're up against. I won't let you ruin this family. I won't let you take him from me." Sarah's stomach lurched, a deep, gut-wrenching fear gripping her heart. His words were not the desperate pleas of a man who still loved her. They were the threats of someone who had lost control and was willing to destroy anyone who stood in his way. "Lucas," Sarah said, her voice breaking as she took a step back. "This isn't about you anymore. It's about Noah, and I will do whatever it takes to make sure he's safe." His eyes flashed with something darker. "You really think you can keep him from me? You have no idea what I'm capable of." Before she could respond, the sound of Noah's small voice called out from the hallway. "Mama!" Both of them turned toward the door, but Lucas was the first to react. His eyes softened for a brief moment, and his features relaxed as he faced the boy who had been the center of this whole conflict. "Go back to bed, Noah," Lucas said, his voice suddenly calm, almost gentle. "Mom and I are just talking." Sarah's heart ached as she watched Noah hesitate, his tiny form framed by the door. He didn't understand the weight of the situation, Not yet, but he could feel the tension in the air, could see it in their eyes. "No, Mama," Noah said, his voice small but insistent. "Are you okay?" The question broke something in Sarah. She felt the tears welling up in her eyes again, the crushing weight of everything crashing down on her. She wanted so badly to make this right for Noah, to protect him from the ugliness that had taken root in their lives. But she couldn't do it alone. Sarah stepped toward Noah, holding her arms open to him. "Come here, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's okay. Everything's going to be okay." But as Noah wrapped his small arms around her, Lucas's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You think it's going to be okay? You think you can just walk away without consequences? I'll make sure of it, Sarah. I'll make sure you regret this." The words hung in the air, and for a moment it felt as though the ground beneath her feet might give way. But Sarah held on to Noah tightly, grounding herself in the reality of what she had to do. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about keeping her son safe, and no matter what Lucas did, she wasn't backing down. The next few days passed in a haze, each one stretching longer than the last. Sarah's mind felt like a battlefield, torn between the ever-growing sense of danger from Lucas and the deep, unshakable love she had for Noah. Every time she looked at him, the weight of her decision pressed heavier on her shoulders. He was everything she had left, everything that mattered in this increasingly shattered world. Lucas was distant, colder than ever, his presence in the house almost unbearable. He had stopped trying to talk to her, no longer engaging in the casual banter they once shared. The silence between them had become a new language, one that screamed of something much worse than words could ever convey. But he wasn't gone. He was waiting, watching, and Sarah could feel it like a heavy fog pressing down on her chest. It was Friday evening when the tension reached its boiling point. Sarah had been waiting for this moment, the moment when she would finally take action. She had spoken to a lawyer earlier in the week, someone Claire had recommended. The lawyer, a woman named Diana, had assured her that she had options. But no matter how many times Sarah ran through the steps in her mind, the fear of Lucas's reaction paralyzed her. What would he do when he realized she was serious? Would he lash out even more? Would he take Noah from her? Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Claire. "I'm here if you need to talk. I know it's hard, but you don't have to do this alone." Sarah looked at the words, feeling a brief flicker of comfort. Claire had been a steady presence through all of this, reminding her that she wasn't crazy for wanting to protect her son. But deep down, Sarah knew the hardest part was yet to come. Just as she was about to respond, the front door creaked open. Her heart skipped a beat, the all-too-familiar sound sending a shiver down her spine. Lucas was home. He didn't announce his arrival. Instead, he walked into the kitchen, where Sarah was standing at the counter, staring blankly at the half-finished dinner she had prepared. The smell of roasted chicken and vegetables filled the room, a stark contrast to the cold air that had settled between them. She didn't turn around, but she could feel him behind her. He didn't speak, just stood there, watching her. "Lucas," Sarah said, her voice sounding hollow even to her own ears. She couldn't stop herself from trembling as she tried to face him. "We need to talk." Lucas took a step forward, his shadow falling over her. "What is there to talk about?" His voice was low, almost like a growl. "You've already made your decision, haven't you?" Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. She had been preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, her mind was clouded with doubt. Was she really ready to go through with it? To risk everything for her son's safety? "I'm not going to let you hurt him anymore," Sarah said, turning to face him. "You've changed, Lucas. I don't know who you are anymore, but I know this: I can't let Noah be around you like this." The silence that followed was deafening. Lucas's eyes darkened, and for a moment Sarah thought she saw something dangerous flicker in them. He took another step forward, his fists clenched tightly by his sides. "You think you can just take him from me?" His voice was colder now, venomous. "You think you're the only one who loves him? You think you can just walk away without consequences? You don't know who you're dealing with, Sarah." Her breath caught in her throat as his words sank in. She had heard threats before, small ones, veiled in sarcasm or anger, but this felt different. This felt like the calm before the storm. "I'm not asking for permission, Lucas," she said, her voice firm, trying to keep the fear from creeping in. "I'm doing what's best for Noah." He let out a bitter laugh. "Best for him?" He stepped closer again, his breath warm and rancid on her face. "You think you're protecting him? You're ruining him. You're taking him away from his father, from his family, from the life we were supposed to have together. You have no idea what you're doing." Sarah's pulse thudded in her ears, her hands shaking as she stood her ground. "You're not his family, not anymore, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure he never has to live in fear again." The tension between them was thick, the air suffocating as Lucas stood there, glaring at her with cold fury. It was clear he wasn't going to back down, but Sarah wasn't backing down either. "I won't let you manipulate me anymore," Sarah continued, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. "This isn't about us anymore. This is about Noah's future, and I won't let you ruin it." Lucas's face twisted in rage, his jaw clenching as he took a step closer, looming over her. Sarah's breath caught, but she didn't move. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "You're making a mistake," Lucas spat, his voice a low, menacing growl. "I'll make sure you regret this, Sarah. I'll make sure you never see him again." With that, he turned and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. The sound reverberated through the house, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Sarah stood there shaking, her heart racing. She had expected anger. She had expected threats. But the coldness in his eyes, the sheer malice that had radiated from him, left her feeling nauseous. For a long moment she stood frozen, her mind racing. What did he mean by that? Noah's soft voice from the other room snapped her out of her thoughts. "Mama?" With a deep, steadying breath, Sarah wiped the tears from her eyes and walked toward it, his eyes wide with concern. "I'm okay, sweetheart," she said, sitting beside him on the bed and pulling him into her arms. "Mama's okay." Noah didn't say anything, but he nestled closer to her, sensing that something was off, even if he didn't understand the full picture. "Everything's going to be all right, Noah," Sarah whispered, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. "We're going to be all right." But as she held her son, she knew deep down that the storm wasn't over. It had only just begun. The next morning, the house felt different. A coldness had settled into the walls, and even the sunlight streaming through the windows couldn't chase it away. Sarah's heart was still pounding from the confrontation the night before, her thoughts racing with everything Lucas had said. "You'll regret this." The words echoed in her mind, haunting her with every step. She had never seen him so angry, never heard that kind of venom in his voice. What did he mean by that? Was it an empty threat, or was there something darker behind his words? The reality of the situation was beginning to feel more suffocating with each passing hour. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of legal papers she had gathered over the past week. The lawyer, Diana, had been supportive, but Sarah knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. She was prepared for a battle. But something about Lucas's reaction made her wonder just how far he was willing to go. The soft sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Noah wandered into the kitchen, his hair messy from sleep, his little face a portrait of innocence. He didn't understand any of what had happened, and Sarah was grateful for that. For now, all he needed to know was that his mother was there to protect him. "Morning, Mama," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Good morning, sweetheart," Sarah replied, her voice filled with warmth, though she couldn't shake the weight in her chest. She smiled at him, trying to keep the fear from showing. "How about some breakfast?" Noah's eyes lit up. "Pancakes," Sarah laughed softly. "Pancakes it is." As she moved to the stove, preparing breakfast for her son, her mind couldn't help but drift back to the night before. Lucas's threats hadn't been idle. She knew that now. There was something dangerous about him. something lurking beneath the surface that Sarah had ignored for far too long. She flipped the pancakes onto a plate and set them in front of Noah, who immediately dug in with his usual enthusiasm. She watched him for a moment, her heart aching with the weight of her choices. She had to protect him. She had to keep him safe no matter the cost. After breakfast, Sarah excused herself, saying she had some errands to run. She needed to take a breath, to clear her mind before making any more decisions. She needed to prepare for the inevitable confrontation with Lucas, the one she knew was coming. She stepped outside into the cool morning air, the fresh breeze offering some comfort. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful even, but there was no peace inside her. Sarah felt like she was walking through a fog, unsure of the next step, uncertain of how to move forward. But she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't keep living in this fear, this constant uncertainty. Lucas had to be stopped. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts. This time, it was a message from Diana. "We've got a meeting scheduled for 2 p.m. today. Bring any evidence you've collected and we'll go over the next steps." Sarah felt a small pang of relief. At least there was a plan. At least someone had her back. But the reality of what was coming sank in like a stone in her stomach. The process would be slow. It would be painful. But it would be worth it for Noah's sake. She had barely made it to her car when another message arrived. This one from Claire. "Sarah, I'm so proud of you for standing up. You're doing the right thing. Let me know if you need anything today. You've got this." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. It felt like the world was crumbling around her. Yet Claire's words were like a lifeline, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this. Claire had been there from the beginning, always offering a listening ear, always ready to support her. For the first time in days, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. She drove to the lawyer's office, the city streets passing by in a blur. The familiar landscape had taken on an eerie quality, as though everything was the same. Yet nothing felt right anymore. Sarah pulled into the parking lot, her hands shaking as she turned off the engine. As she walked into the office, the cool air inside offered little comfort. Diana, the lawyer, greeted her with a firm handshake, her face serious but understanding. She led Sarah into a small conference room, where they sat across from each other at a wooden table. "Do you have everything we need?" Diana asked, looking through the papers Sarah had brought. "Yes," Sarah said, her voice low but steady. "I've been keeping a record of everything. Text messages, the threats, the way he treats Noah. I don't know if it will be enough. He's so manipulative. He's not going to go down without a fight." Diana nodded, her expression sympathetic. "Abusers often don't. That's why we need to be prepared for the long haul. But we have to start somewhere. And you're doing the right thing by standing up now." Sarah clenched her fists under the table, trying to steady herself. The fear was still there, gnawing at her insides, but now it was mixed with a sense of resolve. She could do this. For Noah. They spent the next hour discussing legal strategies, collecting more evidence and outlining the next steps. Diana was professional and thorough. But it was clear that Sarah would have to be prepared for the emotional toll this would take. Lucas would fight dirty. He would try to manipulate the situation. He would try to tear her down. But no matter what, Sarah wouldn't let him take Noah. Not now. Not ever. As she left the lawyer's office, the weight on her shoulders felt a little lighter, but the storm was far from over. The hardest part was just beginning. Lucas would come for her, but she wouldn't back down. She needed to stay strong, for Noah. The days after her meeting with Diana blurred into each other. Sarah found herself waking up earlier than usual, her mind immediately racing with everything that still needed to be done. The weight of her decision to leave Lucas seemed heavier now, but she refused to falter. She had come this far, and there was no going back. Her relationship with Lucas had always been complicated. But now, the small moments of tension she had once brushed off felt like ominous signals. His words from that night lingered, creeping into her thoughts when she least expected it. "You'll regret this." She heard them constantly, like an echo in a cave, deep and haunting. Today, however, was different. Today, she had a feeling in her gut that something was coming. It had been too quiet, too still in the days since the confrontation. Lucas hadn't reached out to her, and she hadn't heard from him at all. She told herself that maybe that was a good thing, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. As Sarah prepared Noah for his morning routine, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Her heart skipped in her chest. She wasn't expecting anyone, but her first thought was that it might be Lucas. She wiped her hands on her jeans and walked toward the front door, her mind racing with scenarios. What if it was him? What if he showed up here demanding to see Noah? What if he tried to talk her into coming back? When Sarah opened the door, the sight that met her didn't ease her nerves in the slightest. Standing before her was a man she didn't recognize. A tall figure dressed in dark clothes, his face obscured by sunglasses and a baseball cap. He held a small bouquet of flowers, the bright colors stark against his somber demeanor. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky despite her best efforts to sound confident. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm looking for Sarah Monroe." "I'm Sarah," she replied, her instincts telling her that something wasn't right. "These are for you," the man said, handing her the flowers with an air of finality. His tone was polite, but his posture was stiff, rigid. He didn't seem like someone who had simply come to drop off a gift. Sarah glanced at the bouquet in her hands, noting the red roses, a symbol that she had learned long ago to associate with manipulation. Not love. It was a gesture Lucas would make, something designed to soften her resolve, to remind her of the good parts of their past, but it only made her feel more uneasy. "Thank you," Sarah said, forcing a smile, though every part of her wanted to slam the door shut. Before she could retreat inside, the man took a step forward, his voice lowering. "Your husband has been very upset. He's not someone you want to cross, Mrs. Monroe. I suggest you think very carefully about the path you're on." Her blood ran cold. The words were chilling, spoken in a way that felt too casual, too familiar. She recognized the threat instantly. "Tell him I'm not afraid of him," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her chest, "and that I'm done with him." The man stared at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the quiet street like a shadow that hadn't quite faded. Sarah stood there, frozen for a long time after the encounter. Her heart was hammering in her chest, her mind working to make sense of the cryptic message. She didn't need to hear any more for the message to be clear. Lucas was watching her. He wasn't giving up, the danger wasn't over. It had only just begun. The flowers, now an unwanted reminder of everything she was trying to escape, were still clutched in her hands. She walked inside, shutting the door behind her. Noah was in the living room, unaware of the threat that had just been made. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her first instinct was to call Claire. She needed to talk, to process this, but something held her back. What if Lucas had people watching her every move? What if her calls weren't safe anymore? She glanced at the flowers one more time and set them down on the kitchen counter. The weight of them felt suffocating, like a symbol of everything she couldn't escape. She had already come so far, but Lucas wasn't going to let her go that easily. He wouldn't stop until he had what he wanted, and what he wanted was control. At that moment, Sarah knew she couldn't wait any longer. The time for being passive, for trying to avoid confrontation, was over. She had to act now. She had. If she didn't, things would only get worse. Sarah had no idea that her life would feel like a constant war zone, but lately, that was exactly how it seemed. Every decision, every breath she took felt like a battle, and in the wake of the mysterious visitor's warning, the stakes had never been higher. She spent the next few days in a haze, a mix of adrenaline and dread coursing through her. Every noise outside her door, every shadow that flickered in the corner of her vision, made her pulse quicken. She was on edge, hyper-aware of everything around her. But the silence from Lucas was equally unsettling. She had always believed that silence was golden, but now it felt more like a loaded gun pointed straight at her chest. That afternoon, Sarah took Noah to the park. He loved the swings, the laughter, and the freedom that came with running through the grass, his little legs working faster than his body could keep up. Sarah tried to smile as he ran ahead, but her eyes kept darting around, scanning the people, the cars passing by, the benches where older folks sat, oblivious to her inner turmoil. "Mom! Watch me!" Noah called, his voice filled with pure joy. He swung higher and higher, his feet almost touching the sky. Sarah forced herself to focus on her son. This was for him, after all. This was why she was doing everything she could to protect their future, to give him a life free from the fear she had lived for so long. "Good job, sweetie," she cheered, clapping her hands. As she stood there, trying to embrace the fleeting moment of peace, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text message. She pulled it out quickly, heart pounding. It was from Claire. "Sarah, I think we need to talk. I know you've been feeling on edge, but there's something you should know. I found something out about Lucas. It's serious." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. What could it be? What could be more serious than everything she'd already been through? She quickly typed back, "What do you mean? What did you find?" Claire's response came almost instantly. "I don't have all the details yet, but I've been looking into him. I found some things, Sarah, things that I think you need to hear. Can we meet up?" The request was enough to send a chill down Sarah's spine. She couldn't help but wonder what Claire had uncovered. Was there more to Lucas than she had realized? More than what had been evident on the surface? Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a message from Claire. It was a call, a blocked number. Her stomach twisted in knots. It had to be Lucas, didn't it? He was never one to let things go so easily. The thought of hearing his voice, of dealing with whatever threat he had in store for her next, made her hands tremble. Taking a deep breath, Sarah accepted the call. "Hello?" she said, trying to steady her voice. There was silence on the other end. Just long, suffocating silence. "Hello?" she repeated, her pulse racing. Then, just when she thought she might hang up, a voice came through, a deep, raspy voice she didn't recognize. "Sarah." Her stomach dropped. It wasn't Lucas. "Who is this?" she demanded, the fear beginning to creep into her tone. The voice on the other end chuckled, a dark, menacing sound. "You don't know me, but I know you. And I know what you've been trying to do." Sarah's heart slammed in her chest. Who was this? What did they want from her? "Stop calling me," Sarah said. Her voice barely a whisper as she felt the walls closing in around her. "You think you can just leave him? You think you can take Noah and run away? There's no escape, Sarah. Not for you, not for him. We always find people like you." The voice sneered. And before she could respond, before she could ask more questions, the call was abruptly cut off. Sarah stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. Her mind raced, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Who was that? What did they mean by, "We always find people like you"? The weight of the situation pressed down on her. The terror she had been suppressing for weeks was suddenly overwhelming. This wasn't just about Lucas anymore. This was bigger. There were people involved, people who weren't going to let her go so easily. Noah came running over to her, his small hand tugging at her sleeve. "Mom, are you okay?" Sarah snapped out of her trance, swallowing hard. She forced a smile, trying to mask her fear. "I'm fine, sweetie. Let's just go home." As they walked back to the car, every step felt heavier than the last. Sarah had known this journey wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't anticipated this level of danger, this kind of threat. And now, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together. Lucas wasn't just dangerous on his own. There was an entire network of people around him, people who would stop at nothing to ensure she didn't escape. As she buckled Noah into his car seat, she glanced around one last time, feeling the eyes of the world watching her. But this time, it wasn't just Lucas who was out there. There was a much darker force looming just beyond the horizon. The next few days were a blur of unease and frantic activity. Sarah couldn't shake the haunting voice from the phone call. She kept replaying it in her mind. "We always find people like you." The words echoed through her thoughts, sending ripples of fear through her every time she closed her eyes. She had been trying to distance herself from Lucas for months, but now it seemed there was a much deeper and more dangerous web entangling her. Despite the tension hanging in the air, Sarah couldn't afford to let her guard down. She knew Lucas was watching, waiting for the moment when she would slip up. He always had a way of getting under her skin, making her feel like there was no way out. But this time, things were different. This time, Sarah wasn't going to back down. She had to be strong, for Noah. They had returned home after the phone call, but the house felt like a prison. The walls seemed to close in tighter with each passing hour. Sarah had spent the evening scanning every corner, every shadow, looking for signs that someone was watching them. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. There was no safe place, no respite from the ever-present fear that had become her reality. It was late when Sarah sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. She had been trying to track down any leads that might help her understand who was behind the threats. Claire had promised to meet her soon, but Sarah's mind was racing, and she knew she couldn't wait for answers much longer. As she typed, her phone buzzed again. It was Claire. "I found something, Sarah. I need you to listen carefully. Meet me at the usual spot in an hour. I'll explain everything." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The usual spot was the small cafe they frequented, the one in the corner of the city where the streets seemed quieter, the shadows longer. It felt safe there, like no one could find them. She quickly typed back, "I'm on my way." Grabbing her keys, she took a deep breath and glanced toward the living room. Noah was fast asleep on the couch, the television softly glowing in the dark. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was wise to leave him alone. But there was no time to waste. She kissed him gently on the forehead, whispered a prayer of protection, and slipped out of the house. The cafe was empty when Sarah arrived, just the way she liked it. The soft hum of the espresso machine and the faint smell of roasted coffee beans filled the air. She sat in their usual booth, waiting for Claire. The tension in her chest didn't ease, though. She couldn't shake the thought that time was running out. Minutes later, Claire walked in, her face tight with worry. She looked around quickly, then slid into the booth across from Sarah. She was holding a manila folder, its contents hidden beneath a layer of paper. Sarah's pulse quickened. "Do you have it?" Sarah asked, her voice low. Claire nodded, her eyes scanning the room before she pushed the folder across the table. Sarah hesitated, then opened it carefully. Inside were a series of photographs, grainy, black and white images. The first was of a man, tall and broad-shouldered, standing in front of a house. Sarah's stomach churned as she recognized it. It was her own home. "What is this?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. Claire leaned in closer. "I've been doing some digging. I found out that Lucas is connected to a group of people who aren't just local. They've been tracking you, Sarah. They know everything about you, where you live, where you go, who you talk to." Sarah felt the weight of her situation settle heavily on her shoulders. This was worse than she had feared. These people weren't just some angry ex-husband trying to regain control. They were a network, a system, and it wasn't just her safety at risk anymore. It was Noah's, too. She reached for the next photograph. This time, it was a close-up shot of her, taken while she was dropping Noah off at school. It had been taken from a distance, but the quality of the image was too clear to be a coincidence. "They've been watching us," Sarah whispered. "Every step, every move we make." Claire's eyes softened. "Sarah, I'm so sorry, but there's more. Look at this." Claire handed her another photo, this one of Lucas standing in a dark alley, shaking hands with a man Sarah had never seen before. He was shorter than Lucas, with a scar that ran down the side of his face. The man looked dangerous. And the handshake, it wasn't the type of deal you made in the light of day. "Who is this?" Sarah asked, her throat tightening. "I don't know, but I've been asking around. His name is Marco Caruso. He's part of a larger syndicate, people who specialize in control, manipulation, and intimidation. They don't take kindly to anyone who tries to break away, and they won't stop until they get what they want." Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the photo. Lucas was in over his head. But he wasn't the only one now. She was tangled up in something she couldn't even begin to understand. "What do we do now?" Sarah whispered, feeling utterly lost. Claire reached across the table, gripping Sarah's hand tightly. "You have to leave, Sarah. It's the only way. You and Noah are in too deep. You have to get out now before it's too late." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as the enormity of Claire's words hit her. She had always believed that the worst of her fears, of Lucas, of the threats, was behind her. But now she realized that she had been living in a nightmare all along. There was no way out, no easy escape. But there was one thing she knew for sure. She would protect Noah, no matter the cost. "Thank you." "Claire," Sarah whispered. "Thank you for everything." Claire gave her a sad smile, squeezing her hand one last time. "Just be safe, Sarah. Please." As Sarah left the cafe, the weight of the decision before her grew heavier with each step. She had no idea how she would escape this nightmare, how she could protect Noah. But she knew one thing: she couldn't let this darkness swallow them. Not without a fight. The next morning, Sarah was a woman on the edge. She had spent the entire night wrestling with her thoughts, piecing together everything Claire had told her, trying to find a way out. But nothing seemed to make sense. Every direction she considered felt like a trap. The looming threat of Lucas and his mysterious associates cast a shadow over every corner of her life, and the thought of leaving, truly leaving, felt like walking into a void. Noah had woken up early as usual and was sitting at the kitchen table, spooning cereal into his mouth with the kind of innocent focus only children could possess. The way he looked up at her with his big, trusting eyes made Sarah's heart ache with a mixture of love and fear. She had always prided herself on being a good mother, on providing a safe and stable home for Noah. But now, everything had changed. "Mom," Noah said between bites, his voice soft and filled with a childlike curiosity. "When do we go to the park today?" Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. She had promised Noah a trip to the park, but in her current state she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. "Not today, sweetie," she said gently, forcing a smile. "We'll go soon, I promise, but we need to stay home today." Noah's brow furrowed for a moment, as though he sensed something was off. Then, with a small nod, he returned to his cereal, not pushing her further. Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. This was her life now, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy for her son, even as her world crumbled around her. The house was still, too still. She had always been a person who liked a little noise, a little bustle, but now the silence felt suffocating. Sarah's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Cutting through the tension, she glanced at the screen. It was a message from Claire. "They know about the park, Sarah. I saw someone watching your house. Be careful. They're closer than you think." The words hit her like a cold slap to the face. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She had no idea what Claire meant. But the urgency in the message was clear. She couldn't risk staying in the house another minute. Before she could even think of what to do next, a knock echoed through the front door. Sarah's body tensed. She didn't recognize the knock. It wasn't Lucas. He would have just walked in. Her mind raced as she approached the door cautiously. Peering through the peephole, she saw a figure standing in the bright morning sunlight. It was a woman, dressed in a neat business suit, holding a briefcase. She appeared unassuming, but Sarah's instincts told her to be wary. She stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. But then she hesitated. The woman's appearance seemed too precise, too calculated to be random. Could it be someone from Lucas's world? Someone sent to track her movements? With a final breath of resolve, Sarah opened the door. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady, though her insides were a storm of doubt and fear. The woman smiled warmly, her posture immaculate. "Good morning, ma'am. My name is Jessica Green. I'm with a private security firm. I've been hired to ensure your safety." Sarah's brows furrowed. "Security? Hired by whom?" "I'm afraid I don't understand," Sarah replied, a chill creeping into her spine. "Security? Why would I need security?" Jessica's smile didn't waver. "It's in your best interest, ma'am. There are certain individuals who have been trying to reach you, people who may pose a threat to you and your family. My firm has been hired to make sure you and your son are protected. We've been monitoring the situation and believe you may be in danger." Sarah's pulse raced. "Who hired you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. She needed answers. She needed clarity, but all she had now was uncertainty. Jessica's smile faded just a little. "I'm afraid I can't disclose that information, but I can assure you that I'm here to help. If you'd like, we can discuss further details about your protection plan." "Protection plan?" Sarah echoed, her throat tight with disbelief. "I don't need a protection plan. I need to know what's going on. I need to understand who's behind all of this." For a brief moment, Sarah saw something flicker in Jessica's eyes, almost as though her calm demeanor cracked just for an instant. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by that same reassuring smile. "If you'd like to stay safe, ma'am," Jessica continued, "I suggest you let us handle this. The people watching you are not to be underestimated. I can't go into too much detail, but trust me, this is not a situation you can navigate alone." Sarah stood there, unsure of what to believe. Her instincts told her that something wasn't right. Jessica's calm, almost too perfect appearance screamed of someone with an agenda, someone playing a game she didn't fully understand. But at the same time, a part of her wondered if this was her only chance to stay ahead of the danger. "I'll think about it," Sarah said finally, her voice firm but cautious. "I need time." Jessica gave a curt nod, though her smile remained fixed. "Of course. I'll be in touch. Stay safe, ma'am." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing in the doorway, the sense of unease growing with every step the woman took. As the door clicked shut, Sarah leaned back against it, her mind spinning with questions. What kind of game was this woman playing, and who was behind the protection plan? More importantly, how was she going to keep Noah safe if every move she made felt like a step deeper into a trap? The rest of the day dragged on, the weight of Jessica's visit clinging to Sarah like a thick fog. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. She had been so focused on protecting Noah from the immediate dangers posed by Lucas and his mysterious associates that she had failed to recognize the bigger picture. The more she thought about Jessica's calm demeanor and cryptic words, the more she questioned her trustworthiness. Was Jessica really there to protect her? Or was she another pawn in someone else's game? Sarah walked around the house aimlessly, her mind spiraling with possibilities. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle outside the window felt like it was a part of some greater scheme to trap her. She had to get out of this, but the walls seemed to be closing in on her. Noah's innocent presence in the other room, his laughter echoing as he played with his toys, was the only thing grounding her in this nightmare. She had to protect him. Just as she was about to check on him, the phone rang. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw the name on the caller ID. It was Claire. She had been waiting for this call all day. "Hello?" Sarah answered, her voice tense. "Sarah, you need to listen to me." Claire's voice came through the receiver, sharp and urgent. "It's not just Lucas, there's someone else, someone you don't know yet. I'm trying to get you the information, but it's moving fast. You need to stay alert, keep your eyes open. You're not just in danger, you're a pawn in something much bigger. They've been planning this for a while. You have to get away, get Noah and go now." Sarah's pulse quickened. Who's doing this, Claire? I need to know. I need something real. This is too much." Claire paused. There was a crackling silence, and for a moment, Sarah thought the call had been dropped. But then Claire's voice returned, softer now, tinged with fear. "I'm sending you something. A file, it'll explain everything. Just don't trust anyone right now, especially not Jessica. She's not what she says she is." The line went dead before Sarah could say another word. Her hands shook as she set the phone down. She felt like she was teetering on the edge of a cliff, unable to see the bottom, but knowing that every step she took could plunge her further into chaos. She walked quickly to the computer, her thoughts racing. Could Claire be right? Could Jessica be involved in something darker than she'd imagined? And who exactly was pulling the strings? The sound of Noah's laughter broke her concentration, and she turned to see him standing at the top of the stairs, a smile on his face. Her heart softened. He was still so innocent, so unaware of the dangers surrounding them. Sarah couldn't let him get hurt. She couldn't let anyone else control his life, not when she had the power to protect him. But how? How could she protect him from something as insidious as this? The answer came to her like a lightning bolt. She needed to leave, but to do that, she had to trust Claire, completely. And for that, she had to take a huge leap of faith. Sarah rushed to the computer, logging into her email. Sure enough, there was a message from Claire, subject line, "The truth you need." With trembling fingers, Sarah clicked on the file and opened it. What she saw made her stomach drop. It was a dossier filled with names, dates, and connections that Sarah didn't fully understand, but one thing was clear. The web of danger surrounding her was deeper and more complex than she could have ever imagined. Lucas wasn't the mastermind. He was a part of a much larger operation. But the biggest shock came at the end of the file, where Sarah saw the name Cameron Keller. Her breath caught in her throat. Cameron Keller, her ex-husband, the man she had left years ago for reasons she had long since buried. He was tied to this, tied to everything. Sarah couldn't breathe. Cameron had never been a part of her life after the divorce. They had kept their distance and she had moved on. But now, it seemed like their past had come back to haunt her in the worst way possible. Why had Claire kept this from her? Why hadn't she told her the truth sooner? Before she could process the gravity of the situation, another knock echoed through the door. She froze, every muscle in her body tensed. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Noah looked up at her from the stairs, his innocent eyes filled with confusion. Sarah grabbed her phone, quickly texting Claire, "It's him, Cameron. Why didn't you tell me? I'm not safe." The knock came again, more insistent this time. She looked at Noah, her heart breaking for him. The sweet, naive little boy had no idea how much danger they were in. She had to protect him. There was no turning back now. Slowly, she walked toward the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the doorknob. She had no idea who was on the other side, but she wasn't ready to face whatever it was. She wasn't ready for the truth to come crashing down on her. Not like this. With one final glance at Noah, Sarah opened the door. The door creaked open, and Sarah's eyes locked onto the figure standing there. A chill ran down her spine as she faced the person she had been dreading, the last person she expected to see tonight. Standing on the doorstep, his face shadowed by the dim light from the hallway, was Cameron Keller. Her heart skipped a beat. The man she had been married to for 5 years, the father of Noah, the man who had disappeared from her life and whose name she had not spoken in years. She had moved on from the wounds he had caused, but now, in front of her, he was a reminder of everything she had left behind. He was no longer the man she had married. His hair had grayed at the temples, his posture sagging under the weight of time and regret, but his eyes, the same cold, calculating eyes, remained unchanged. The eyes that had once promised her love, but had always hidden something darker. "Sarah." Cameron's voice was low and controlled, yet there was an undercurrent of something she couldn't place. His gaze flickered past her, taking in the living room behind her, the place where Noah was playing innocently just moments ago. "Can we talk?" Her mind raced, but her body froze. For a split second, all she could think of was how Noah was still upstairs, how close they were to danger. "What do you want?" "Cameron?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "I need you to listen to me," Cameron said, his hand resting on the doorframe as he stepped closer, his voice soft, almost pleading. "I know you've been through a lot, and I know you think I'm the enemy. But there are things you don't understand. Things that I need to explain." Sarah didn't move. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She had been preparing for this moment, expecting him to come back into her life at some point, but she hadn't expected it to happen this way. He was dangerous, and she could feel it, his presence unsettling her every nerve. "Explain?" Sarah shook her head. "The last time you spoke to me, you disappeared, Cameron. You just walked away. You left us with nothing." He winced at her words, and for the first time she saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. It was fleeting, but it was there. "I didn't have a choice," he said, his voice trembling with something that might have been regret. "I was trying to protect you, Sarah. Protect Noah." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Protect us? By running away and leaving us to fend for ourselves?" His gaze hardened again, but there was still something in his voice that made her hesitate. "You don't understand. I never wanted this for you, but there are people. Dangerous people. I couldn't keep you safe. Not the way I wanted to." She was shaking her head now, more in disbelief than anger. "What are you talking about? Who are these people, Cameron, and why now? Why come back after all these years?" Before Cameron could answer, she heard a faint sound from the hallway, a sound that made her blood run cold. Noah. He was standing at the top of the stairs, peering down at the scene unfolding below. His small figure seemed so fragile, his innocent face confused by the tension in the air. He had no idea who this man was, no idea what danger he might be in. Sarah's heart wrenched and she instinctively stepped forward, her body blocking Cameron's view of Noah. "No, no, you're not going anywhere near him," she snapped, her voice sharp and protective. "You lost the right to be his father the day you walked out." Cameron's expression shifted, his jaw tightening. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I never have," he said quietly. "But I need you to trust me now, for Noah's sake. You need to leave. You and him. Now." Sarah's mind was a whirlwind. He was asking her to trust him again. Trust the man who had abandoned her, the man who had always been a shadow in her life. But something about his words made her freeze. "For Noah's sake," she repeated, incredulous. "You've had nothing to do with him for years, and now you want to pretend you care?" "I never stopped caring," Cameron insisted, his voice firm now. "I made mistakes, but I've spent years trying to fix them. They found me, Sarah. They found you, and if you don't get out of here, they'll find Noah too." The finality of his words hit her like a brick wall. There was no longer any doubt in her mind. Whatever had brought Cameron back into her life, it was bigger than their past. Bigger than everything they had shared. It was about survival. And Noah's future. "Who are they?" Sarah demanded, her voice trembling with fear and anger. "Who is after us, Cameron?" But Cameron didn't answer. His eyes darted toward the front yard, his expression turning tense. "We don't have time for this," he said, urgency lacing his voice. "We need to move now, they're already here." A wave of panic rushed over her. She grabbed Noah's hand and pulled him down the stairs, her heart racing as she tried to comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. Cameron's sudden reappearance, his cryptic warnings, the things he'd left unsaid. They were in danger. As Sarah turned to face Cameron, her mind made up. She had no choice but to run. But just as she reached for the door handle to leave, a sound stopped her cold. A car door slamming shut outside, the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching quickly, and then the unmistakable voice of someone who had been hunting them. "Sarah, you didn't think you could escape, did you?" Sarah froze in place, her hand still gripping the doorknob as her blood ran cold. The voice, chilling and familiar, cut through the air like a knife. The words were spoken with such quiet menace that they sent a wave of dread crashing through her chest. "You didn't think you could escape, did you?" The voice was deep and commanding, but it carried an unmistakable venom, a malevolence that only someone from her past could conjure. She turned, her heart racing, and saw him. David Keller, Cameron's brother. David, with his slicked-back hair, sharp suit, and cruel smile, was standing in the doorway now. Behind him, two other men Sarah didn't recognize but could easily guess were part of his ruthless entourage, loomed like silent sentinels. Their eyes were cold, focused, and unblinking. Her breath hitched as she looked at David, the man who had been the source of so much of her fear and pain. Years ago, he had terrorized her, manipulated her, and used his connection to Cameron to keep her under his thumb. She had escaped once, only to find herself trapped in this twisted reunion. "David," Sarah breathed, her voice barely a whisper. She had hoped never to see him again. But here he was. She couldn't move. Her body was frozen by the weight of the past crashing into the present. David smiled, the kind of smile that sent a shiver down her spine, a smile that suggested he enjoyed every moment of the control he had over her life. "You thought you were safe, Sarah," he said softly, his voice slick with malice. "You thought you could run away from everything and start over. But you can't. Not with me in the picture." She stepped back instinctively, pulling Noah closer to her side. "What do you want from us?" she demanded, her voice quivering. Her eyes darted to Cameron, standing frozen by the door, his face pale and haunted. He had known all along that David would come, and yet he had never warned her. He had never prepared her for this moment. David's smile widened, and he stepped closer to the threshold. "What I want is simple, Sarah. I want control, and I want what's mine." His eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking to Noah, who was still clutching Sarah's hand, confused by the tension in the room. "Your little boy. He's the key to everything. He's the last piece of the puzzle." A cold wave of fear washed over Sarah. She stepped in front of Noah protectively. "Stay away from him," she said, her voice firm despite the terror that threatened to consume her. "You're not touching him." David chuckled, a low, cruel sound that made her stomach twist. "You really think you can stop this? You really think you can protect him from me?" He glanced over his shoulder at the two men standing silently behind him. "You're running out of time, Sarah. There's nowhere left to hide." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a man who wanted her. This wasn't just a twisted family drama. David wasn't here for some petty revenge. He had a much bigger plan. He needed Noah for something, and whatever it wasn't good. Cameron stepped forward, his eyes wide with fear. "David, please." But David held up a hand, silencing him. "I'm not interested in your pleas, Cameron. You lost your chance years ago." Cameron's face twisted with a mixture of guilt and fear, his eyes flickering to Sarah. "You don't know what he's capable of," he whispered urgently. "Please. You have to trust me, Sarah. We need to leave now." "Now!" The panic in Cameron's voice was undeniable. Sarah glanced at him, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. Was this the same man who had walked out on her and Noah all those years ago? The same man who had left them to fend for themselves, only to show up now with a story of betrayal and danger? Could she trust him? But there was no time to ponder this. David's men were already moving closer, blocking the door, their eyes fixed on Sarah and Noah with cold intent. "Get away from the door," David commanded, his voice icy. "You're coming with me, Sarah. And you, little one," he said, his gaze flicking to Noah with a smirk. "You're going to help us get what we want." Her breath caught in her throat. She had to protect her son. There was no other option. No matter what had happened with Cameron, no matter how many lies had been spun in the past, this was her fight now. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, Sarah shoved past Cameron and bolted for the back door. "Noah, come on," she shouted, pulling him with her as they rushed down the hallway toward the kitchen. The sounds of David's men following behind them made her heart pound in her chest, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. "Stop them!" David shouted from behind, his voice seething with fury. "They can't get away!" "Do not let them escape!" But Sarah had already reached the kitchen door, her fingers fumbling for the handle as she tried to yank it open. There was no time left to waste. She could hear the footsteps growing louder, closer. She had to think fast. Her heart raced as she glanced at Noah, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Hold on, baby," she whispered desperately, trying to steady her breathing. "We're going to get out of here. We're going to be okay." But just as the door finally creaked open, Sarah's breath caught. The sight that met her eyes was enough to freeze her in place, standing in the yard just beyond the door. was a man she never expected to see. The yard beyond the kitchen door was bathed in a faint amber glow as the sun began to set. It should have been a scene of serenity, the calm before the night. But to Sarah, everything felt wrong. Her breath caught in her throat and her hands trembled as they gripped the doorframe. The man standing in the yard wasn't just any stranger. It was someone from her past, a figure she had buried deep within the recesses of her mind, someone she had never expected to see again, not after everything that had happened. It was Henry Jacobs, her first love, the man she had trusted before everything had crumbled, the man she had believed in until he too had turned his back on her. But there he was now, standing silently in the fading light, his face unreadable. His gaze was fixed on her with an intensity that sent a ripple of recognition and disbelief through her. "Henry." Her voice barely escaped her lips. Noah clung to her side, sensing the shift in the air, his innocent eyes wide with confusion. "Sarah." Henry's voice was low, but there was no mistaking the depth of the years that had passed. His face was older, more worn, but his eyes, those eyes, still held the same sorrowful intensity she remembered. The same warmth, the same yearning that had once filled her heart with hope. But hope had long since faded. That chapter had ended. "What are you doing here?" Sarah's voice shook, a wave of anger rising within her. She stepped in front of Noah, her protective instinct kicking in. "You have no business being here." Henry didn't flinch. He took a small step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Sarah, listen to me. I didn't come to cause trouble, but I can't just stand by and let this happen." The words hung in the air, thick with tension. Behind her, Sarah could hear the sound of David's men still moving through the house. Their footsteps getting closer. Time was running out. She didn't have time for this, whatever this was. "Let me get this straight," she snapped, her voice tightening. "You show up after all these years, right when my life is falling apart, and now you want me to trust you." Henry's face softened. "I know this looks bad. But I'm not the same man I was back then, Sarah. I made mistakes, so many mistakes. But I came here because I knew something was wrong, and you need to hear me out." She shook her head, her heart heavy with the weight of so many unanswered questions. "You can't just waltz back into my life like this. I don't need anyone else messing things up, especially not you." But before Henry could speak again, a voice broke in from behind her, a voice that made her stomach twist with renewed terror. "Sarah, don't listen to him." David's figure emerged from the shadows, his eyes narrowing with venom as he looked past her at Henry. The cruel smirk on his face was a stark contrast to the fear that now gripped Sarah's chest. "Don't you dare listen to him, Sarah. He's just as dangerous as I am." For a moment, everything froze. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of their past. The man Sarah had once loved, the man who had stood by her through so many hardships, was now standing on the opposite side of this cruel game. The choices they had made, the paths they had chosen, were about to collide once again. Henry's expression darkened as he stepped forward, his eyes hardening with resolve. "I know what he's capable of, Sarah," he said, his voice firm. "You don't want to be caught in the middle of this." David's smirk only grew wider. "Oh, so now you're the hero? How noble!" he sneered, his eyes flicking to the men behind him. "You think you can stop me? You think you can save her from this? You're too late, Henry. She's already in too deep." Sarah's heart raced. She couldn't stand it any longer. The lies, the manipulation, the constant feeling of being trapped in a game she didn't want to play. She turned to Henry, her voice trembling as she asked the question that had been haunting her for years. "Why did you leave me, Henry? Why did you leave us?" The words spilled out before she could stop them. She had never truly given him the chance to explain. It was easier to be angry, to bury the pain and move on with her life. But now, with David closing in on them, she realized how much of her pain had never been resolved. Henry flinched at her words, his jaw tightening. "I didn't leave you, Sarah. I never wanted to leave. But I made a choice, a stupid choice, and it cost me everything." His voice broke slightly, raw with emotion. "I tried to come back, but by then everything had changed. You were gone, and I thought I had lost you for good." David let out a mocking laugh, cutting Henry off. "Such a touching story, Henry. Too bad it's irrelevant now. Sarah's mine to deal with. And as for you," he sneered, "I have no use for you anymore." For a brief moment, Sarah's gaze flicked between the two men, the two pieces of her past that had shaped her in ways she had never fully understood. She wanted to believe Henry. She wanted to believe that there was still some chance for redemption, for healing. But the truth was, she had no time for redemption anymore. Only survival. With a sudden surge of courage, she turned her back to Henry and faced David head-on. "I don't need either of you," she said, her voice steady. "I don't need your games. I don't need your lies. I'm not going to let you hurt my son." David's smile faltered just for a second. His eyes gleamed with menace. "You think you can protect him, Sarah? You think you can protect anyone?" And then, just as he stepped forward, ready to make his move, Sarah heard it. A sound that made her blood run cold. The unmistakable sound of sirens. The sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The tension in the air was suffocating, a tightrope between fear and hope, teetering on the brink of collapse. David's eyes flared with fury. His lips curled into a snarl as he glanced toward the street, his body stiff with rage. He had been so close to regaining control, to making Sarah believe that she had no way out. But now, there was something else, something beyond his reach. The sound of law enforcement. His eyes darted back to Sarah and Henry. "Don't think for a second that this changes anything," David hissed, his voice like acid. "You can't run from me. You never will." Sarah stood her ground. Her heart pounded, but her resolve was unwavering. Her eyes, once filled with uncertainty, were now hard with determination. "I'm done running, David. This is over. It ends tonight." Behind her, Henry's presence was like a quiet anchor in the storm. He stepped forward, a man who had finally made the choice to fight for what was right. For the family he had lost. His voice was calm, but carried an undeniable strength. "You're not going to hurt anyone else," Henry said, his words sharp, final. "You're done." David's sneer deepened. He took another step forward, and for a heartbeat, Sarah was sure that the nightmare was about to resume. She glanced over her shoulder. The sound of the sirens was now deafening. The law was closing in. But just as quickly as David had stepped forward, he stopped. His shoulders tensed, and a flash of calculation passed over his eyes. He turned back toward his men, silently signaling for them to retreat. There was no fight in him now, only cold, calculated retreat. "You think the law can save you?" David spat, his voice full of venom. "You're all fools." With one final glare at Sarah, he turned, motioning for his men to follow. The group quickly disappeared into the shadows, the sound of their footsteps fading as they fled. For a long moment, Sarah stood frozen, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had won. The nightmare was finally over. The man who had once held so much power over her life, who had made her feel small, invisible, was walking away. "Is it really over?" Henry's voice broke through her thoughts. Soft and tentative, she turned to him, finding his face filled with the same disbelief she was feeling. Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, it's over. Finally." As the sirens reached their peak, a squad car pulled up to the driveway. Uniformed officers quickly exited, their eyes scanning the scene. One of them, a tall man with graying hair, stepped forward and gave Sarah a careful glance. "Ma'am, we got your call. Are you all right?" Sarah's voice faltered, but she found the strength to speak. "Yes, I'm fine. It's over now. He's gone." The officer looked at the retreating figures in the distance. Then back at Sarah, assessing her carefully. "Do you need us to pursue him further?" She shook her head, her voice steady but with a touch of finality. "No, he's gone. He won't be coming back." For a moment, the officer nodded, and then motioned to his team to continue scanning the area. But Sarah's attention shifted. Her eyes fell on Henry, who was watching her with a quiet intensity. A wave of exhaustion swept over her. The weight of the last months, the pain, the fear, the doubts, they all came crashing down at once. She closed her eyes, letting herself breathe in the moment of peace. She didn't need anyone else to protect her. She had learned how to protect herself and her son. Henry was still there, and in that moment she realized that no matter how much time had passed, the bond between them wasn't gone. There was a chance for healing, for redemption, for rebuilding what had been lost. But it was something she would have to build slowly. Carefully. "I never wanted to leave you, Sarah," Henry said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I made mistakes. I hurt you. But I never stopped loving you. I don't expect anything from you, but I need you to know that. I was always sorry." Sarah felt her chest tighten as his words washed over her. For so long she had lived with the wound of his abandonment, the unanswered questions that had festered in her soul. And now, hearing him speak so honestly, so raw, something within her stirred. "I know," she whispered. "I know, Henry. I've always known." A silence fell between them, the years between them pressing in like a distant echo. But in that moment, the bitterness seemed to fade, and a quiet understanding passed between them. There was no going back to the way things had been, but maybe, just maybe, there was something new to be built. "I have to go back to Noah," Sarah said, finally breaking the silence. "He's inside. I don't want him to be alone." Henry nodded, his eyes lingering on her. "Of course, I understand." As Sarah turned and walked back toward the house, the weight of the moment began to settle. The storm was over. The battle had been won. But it was only the beginning of something else. Inside, Noah was waiting. She could feel the warmth of his small hand in hers as he reached out to her, his face lighting up with a smile that made everything worth it. "Mom," Noah said, his voice full of wonder. "Is it really over? Are we safe?" Sarah knelt down, brushing the hair from his face, her heart full. "Yes, sweetheart, it's over, and we're safe." For the first time in a long while, Sarah allowed herself to smile, a smile full of promise. The nightmare had passed, and though the road ahead would not be easy, she knew they could face it together. As the last of the officers filed out of the driveway, Sarah stood at the door, watching them go. She wasn't just standing in front of her house. She was standing on the threshold of a new life. A new beginning. A life where she would finally be free of the chains that had bound her for so long. The morning sun cast a soft, golden hue over the yard, its warmth touching everything it reached. The air was crisp, the kind of stillness that signaled the end of a storm, the calm after the chaos. Sarah stood on the porch, her hand resting on the railing, taking in the scene before her. Her heart was full, but not with the fear that had once haunted her. Now it was filled with peace. Noah played in the yard with a few of his new friends, their laughter ringing out like a melody in the distance. Sarah smiled as she watched him, his innocent joy a reminder that the worst was behind them. He was safe. They were both safe. Henry stood beside her, a quiet presence, and though he hadn't said much in the past few days, his companionship was comforting. There was no pressure between them, no expectation. Just the simple knowledge that they had both come a long way. Maybe too far sometimes, but they were here now, together, and that was enough. "I never imagined we'd get here," Henry said softly, his voice low but steady. "I thought I'd lost you forever." Sarah turned to him, her gaze lingering on his face, taking in the lines of regret, the quiet ache in his eyes. But there was something else there now. Hope. A glimmer of possibility. "Neither did I," she replied, her voice trembling with an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. "But here we are." She took a deep breath and turned back to watch Noah, the weight of everything she'd endured pressing gently on her chest. It was heavy, but not crushing. She had carried it for so long, but now it seemed more like a part of her history than her present. The trauma, the fear, the abuse, They no longer had the same power over her. They had shaped her. Yes, but they didn't define her. She had learned something far more important in this battle, that her strength wasn't in her ability to fight, but in her willingness to stand up and say no more. Henry moved closer, hesitating for a moment before speaking again. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Sarah, but I've spent every day since leaving you regretting how I handled things. I was selfish. I walked away when you needed me most. I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. Sarah felt the familiar sting in her chest, the sharp reminder of the years of pain, of feeling abandoned and betrayed. But this time it didn't break her. It was just a scar, one that had healed over time, and now it was no longer an open wound. She met his gaze, her expression soft but resolute. You made mistakes, Henry, she said, her voice clear. We both did. But I've learned that holding on to that pain, that anger, doesn't help anyone. I'm not going to let it define me anymore. We both have a future to look forward to. Henry nodded, his face softening with gratitude, and though there was still sadness there, Sarah could see that he was truly trying to make things right, trying to rebuild what they once had. I'm here now, he said, his voice thick with emotion. If you'll have me, I'll do whatever it takes to prove I'm not the man I was. For a long moment, Sarah simply watched him, letting the words sink in. Could she really trust him again? Could she allow herself to open that door after everything they'd been through? She didn't know. It was too soon. But there was something else, something that gave her the courage to let herself be vulnerable once again. The love they had once shared was still there. It had never truly disappeared. It had just been buried under so much pain and misunderstanding. She turned toward him, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. I don't know if we can go back to what we were, Henry, but I do know that I want to see where we can go from here, together, if you're willing to take the journey with me. Henry's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as he reached out, gently taking her hand. I will, Sarah. I will, no matter how long it takes. Sarah squeezed his hand, a tear slipping down her cheek, though it was one of relief, of quiet joy. The future was still uncertain. There were still challenges ahead, hurdles to overcome. But in that moment, standing beside Henry, watching Noah run and laugh in the yard, she realized that this was her victory, not just because she had freed herself from the nightmare of the past, but because she had reclaimed her power, her identity, her ability to love and be loved. It was all still there, waiting for her to claim it. Noah ran over to them, his face flushed with excitement. Mom, look what I found. He held out a small, shiny rock in his hand, grinning from ear to ear. Sarah knelt down, taking the rock from his hand and examining it with exaggerated interest. That's beautiful, Noah. You're going to be a great geologist one day. Noah giggled, clearly proud of his find. He hugged her tightly. I love you, Mom. Her heart swelled and she held him close. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know. As Sarah stood up, she looked out at the horizon. There was still much to do, still much to rebuild. But she knew now that they would face it together, her. Henry and Noah. Their journey would not be easy, but it would be theirs to walk. They had been through too much to be anything less than stronger for it. The past had shaped them, but it did not control them. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to write. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt the spark of hope flicker within her. The nightmare was over, but the story was just beginning. The end.